Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrum and I am back with another video. It actually feels really good not to be putting up a video every single day. It's been crazy. So today I'm here to do a patron choice video. So I don't know if, I usually say this in these videos, but my patrons on Patreon have the opportunity once a month to vote on a video that they would like to see me do. So usually I come up with about 5 to 6 selections, and then it's open to those who are in the tiers where they can vote, and then I post a video before the end of the month. And we were laughing in the Discord because I feel like as a whole, as a group, they love to see me do these salty behind videos. I'm so convinced that this is like the thing because it was originally a tie between like the anti-TBR tag and then this one, and then we did a runoff in Discord and we were just joking and laughing about the fact that I was like, if y'all just wanted to see me like do a messy video, that's all you had to say. Just do a messy video for us. So I am here to read 5-star reviews, which I think that a lot of people have actually seen this video. This video has been done quite a bit, but I'm here to read 5-star reviews of books that I absolutely loathe, that I did not like. And I'm gonna put a preface here, y'all, just because I just want to make sure that everyone understands, like, these videos are done in fun and humor. Everyone has their own taste, of course. There's gonna be books that I love that y'all hate. There's gonna be books that y'all love that I absolutely hate, because we all have different experiences. We all have different tastes in reading. So this is just for fun. This is not judging anyone. If you love the book that I didn't love, more power to you, because a book just wasn't for me. And I always say that. And I don't like to discourage people from checking out books that I personally don't like, because you may have a completely different experience. So what we're gonna do is we're going to look at 5 books that I loathed. And actually most of them are from this year, to be honest with you. Most of them are from this year. There are 2 on this list of 5 that are from previous years, but for the most part these were books that I didn't enjoy. I don't know, this year it feels like I gave a lot more 1-star books or 1-star, 2-star reviews than I typically do in a year, but I think that my reading has become a tad bit more critical, so that's why that happens like that. So of course I don't own any of these books, so the pictures are going to be on this side of the screen for y'all to check out. So let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so what would this list be without me including the wonderful Midnight Sun? So just a little background. I grew up reading Twilight. I was in high school when I was reading Twilight, and you know, I enjoyed it. Reading it now in my point and stage in my life, it just doesn't hit the same, and I definitely just gave all of the books in my reread, they all got 1-star reviews, and I'm very detailed in why I have issues with Twilight as a whole. I have done a full review on this series and have really talked about the fact that I just don't feel like nostalgia is enough not to identify the problematic aspects of this book. However, I do understand that consumption of media happens regardless of what my personal views are. Those are my personal perspectives, and that's how I feel. Clearly Twilight did well. I believe that Stephanie Meyer, or Midnight Sun, did well. I believe she sold 1 million copies within a week, which, I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But nevertheless, here's to say, I was not surprised that when I went through my Goodreads, I found a lot of 5-star reviews. It was expected. I expected people to love it. The reasons that most people did love this was nostalgia. So let's go ahead and look at our first review. Wow, this was like the best thing I never knew I needed. Honestly, I really hope Stephanie will publish all the other books from the point of view of Edward, because it's all we need. Getting stuff from Edward's perspective, to me, makes him feel more like a creep. I think that it's the thrill of knowing what the quote-unquote hero, or in my opinion, Edward is not a hero, but I'm going to use the term hero here. I think it's the fact that people rather enjoy seeing stuff from both perspectives, the events that are happening, seeing how both characters go through this internal monologue. I really loved reading this book, and it brought me a huge nostalgia. Like, it really made me want to reread all the Twilight Saga and watch the movies, which completely understandable. I really do get that. I think that a lot of people are clinging to the series because of nostalgia purposes, and the fact that Stephenie Meyer is really responsible, not by herself solely, but is in part responsible for this huge second wave of what we call the golden age of young adult literature. However, I always and will continue to say, nostalgia just for me personally is not enough. I think you can consume media and identify the issues with it, but it's, in my opinion, once again, harmful to consume media, say nostalgia, and then not really criticize it for what it is actually perpetuating, especially when we talk about Native representation. To be honest, this one was a little bit more interesting than the first book from Bella's view. I mean, you get to know so much more about the Cullens, and I absolutely love the love between the siblings, and it makes you see how Edward's relationship is with his siblings, which was way better than I expected, honestly. Now, ironically, and y'all are gonna be shocked, I do agree with this, okay? I do agree that we got a perspective of the Cullens that was more rewardable than in the first book. There were Cullens that I really enjoyed seeing in this fifth book, but as a whole, I still thought the book was trash. I mean, it's dumpster fire garbage, to be personally honest here. But I do agree that there were aspects of the Cullens that we were not privy to from Bella's point of view that I think was great to see from Edward's point of view. Now, do I think the voices were any different or any better than the other? Absolutely not. They're both melodramatic. They both are just these, oh my gosh, the world is ending. I need my partner. I need my, like, melodramatic as heck. But I do think that getting the opportunity to see the Cullens was very rewarding. Now, some of the Cullens, Jasper with the Civil War nonsense, I still don't get. I still don't get the glorification of seeing Jasper as a Confederate soldier. Never will get that. Never will acknowledge that as being something rewarding. However, I do think seeing Dr. Cullen as this fully three-dimensional type of individual was actually a good thing. Especially Emmett and Alice. I mean, we all know Edward and Alice were the best power siblings, but Edward and Emmett, I want to read a book about them only. I'm not interested in reading any more books about them, but I can see where this person is coming from in terms of dynamic of wanting to know how their relationship works. Anyways, I think everyone who loved, like, or had any interest in the Twilight Saga will enjoy this book and it'll bring them back so many memories. No! No, I think that this is a point in which it depends upon what point you're in your life. Like, I know there are quite a few of us in the community who have read Twilight in our younger days and now are adults and have moved on with our lives and see the world through a different perspective because we've had a lot more worldly experiences at this point. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that everyone who loved the Twilight series will love it now, which some people will because, you know, nostalgia kicks in. But I also think that people who love the Twilight series may have different perspectives now because their worldview and their life experiences have taught them different things. So that's particularly even talking about myself, not making an assumption, but I loved the Twilight Saga when I was growing up. I remember going to go see the movies. I had a very, very close friend in college that was really, really obsessed with it, and we would go to the movie theaters when the movies were released. I remember, like, loving the books, and when I was supposed to be doing chemistry homework, I was reading the books underneath my desk. Like, I was totally obsessed with it, and this was after I went through a phase with another series that had ended. All this to say that now in 2020 going into 2021, I do not feel the same way about the series. I do not have any nostalgia attachment to them because of the fact that my view of the world and other people has greatly changed from when was that? I don't want to give myself away, a little over 10 years ago. Okay, and let's look at one last review. So this one says, I loved it. Midnight Sun already sets itself up to be 10 times better than Twilight simply because so much more is going on from Edward's side of things than Bella's throughout the story. That is true. There is a lot more that happens within this book. Fighting off bloodlust, family drama, falling in love for the first time at 104 years old. Which, for me, is the hugest problem of this all. Understandably, whenever you read paranormal books, the age gap thing is a little different because you're dealing with immortal beings. So it's always that awkward age thing that's involved that sometimes is just kind of hard to grasp. But for Edward's situation, we as a group, when we had our live show, which I'll link in the card symbol above, when we had our live show, we just could not get past the fact that in 104 years old, Edward had never been in love. Edward never got laid. Like, it was just like, what in the world? It was just so unrealistic to the point that she was attempting to create this world of purity that I think that most of us was like, this is just not real. And I think that that concept of purity has a lot to do with her inserting her Mormon beliefs into the text and the role that she thinks that a man and a woman should have in a partnership and or in a relationship and a marriage. So this whole essence of him being 104 years old, never having fallen in love, never having been laid, never had any interest in being laid, never indulged in self-love. It was like, this is unbelievable. Like, this is not realistic. I don't buy into it. It just doesn't really set the tone. I think at 16 years old, when I was going through all of these hormonal changes and experiencing my first relationships, of course it was like, you know, this felt real, but it's not. It's not reality. But it's made even better by the fact that this version of the story includes flashbacks to previous point in Edward's life and expands upon scenes from Twilight in much more detail, which is true. Like the other review said, that there's more detail in terms of like familiar parts of the Cullens that we don't really get in Twilight, which some of those parts, I will not sit here and lie to you and say that they were not interesting, but some of them were interesting, which it made me like Carlisle a lot more in reading Midnight Sun. Like in Twilight, when Bella just says, we talked all afternoon, in Midnight Sun you actually get to see what they were talking about. Little things like that give a fresh feel to the story that's now 15 years old. So if you actually read this story in detail and very, very closely kind of aligned with actual Twilight, Stephenie Meyer actually changes things in Midnight Sun. So it's kind of hard for me sometimes when I see reviews like this, because I'm like, actually she tweaks stuff. So there were events that were, and not drastically, you have to pay very, very close attention to some like smaller details that she changes stuff, and it never happened that way in the original text. If you're rewriting a book where you are just giving us a glimpse into the perspective of another character, for the most part, everything that happened in the first book, event-wise and detail-wise, should remain the same. But there were things that she tweaked and she changed. So for me, saying like it's a refreshing look at Twilight, you know, since the book is 15 years ago, is not completely true, because she kind of took a little bit of liberty in how she wanted to rewrite this, and it necessarily wasn't just rewriting Twilight from Edward's perspective, if that makes sense. Also, Edward's perspective makes me actually like Bella as a character, so that's a feat in of itself, which I've seen this a lot. I personally don't like either one of them, so I don't think it really matters to me. Like, I dislike both characters to the pit of my stomach. However, I have seen a lot of people say that Bella is a lot more tolerable because you're seeing things from Edward's perspective, like you're not inside of her head, and being inside of her head is seemingly is what drove, and it drove me personally crazy. But I think that people liked not being in her head and not seeing everything from her perspective. So when we got the opportunity to see everything from Edward's perspective, we don't have that angsty, like, I'm not like the other girls, loner, I'm depressed and I hate everybody except Edward vibe. So I don't know. I don't like either one of them, so it doesn't really matter. So the next one that I have on this list is Real Men Knit by Quanah Jackson, which I think most people that I know within my circle and even on BookTube itself, like, genuinely just did not get down with this book. And I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that this was marketed as something that it really wasn't. And for me, I think I talked about this in my worst books of 2020, was that I felt like there was no story there. Like, there was no plot, there was nothing interesting or dynamic about it. The characters themselves, the two love interests, the hero and the heroine, just did not really have a romance. It was just very, very weird. They felt more like brother, sister, siblings, like really, really close friends. So the point that when we got to the steamy parts of the book, it was very, very awkward. And you spend X amount of pages of this book realizing that actually nothing is happening, when the premise of this book had so much potential. So this one actually, I don't believe truly has a lot of 5-star reviews. It's few by far. It definitely has more so on the 3 and downward trend. So I'm just gonna pick one for this book. Okay, so here we go. I've been looking forward to this book for so long because honestly, combining heroes with yarn and knitting is probably my favorite trope ever. Which, true, like, I love crocheting, and I thought that this was like, oh my gosh, you know, having some characters here that love to knit and just work with yarn. So the Strong Brothers definitely delivered on that score. They'll knit you a hat and look gorgeous doing it, people. Just you wait. Once I got past my swooning about that, though, I was struck by how wonderful everything else was I was struck by how wonderful everything else about this novel was. I love the way Quanah Jackson painted the supportive neighborhood surrounding the store, which is true. There definitely was an emphasis on supporting small Black-owned businesses, which is great. I loved how she developed her characters and made them feel so real. Okay, so this is where I kind of disagree with those who really, really enjoyed this book, is that I don't think she did a very good job of her character development. I think that she actually fell flat on her character development. I feel like her characters were so one-dimensional that there was nothing interesting about them. I think that they very much were static, and we really don't get to enjoy them as much as I think that we should have been able to enjoy them. I loved how she never flinched away from the impact that racism has on the daily lives of Black individuals in the US. And more than anything, I love being able to read a romance that featured people of color in positive roles, caretakers and family, friends, parents, lovers, business owners, and pillars of their community. Plus, for this review, like, definitely a good thing. That's definitely a positive scene. It was such a relief to not have to wade through the kinds of negative stereotypes that often flood TV and movies these days. Ooh! What negative stereotypes? I mean, I guess negative stereotypes in terms of people of color, I'm guessing, which, yes, I agree. Her characters actually look and sound like people you know in real life. So, alright, so I'm not really sure what that part of the review means, how characters actually look and sound like people you know in real life. I'm guessing not building, I guess it was not creating her characters into stereotypical caricatures, meaning that we see a lot of stereotyping going on that is not realistic, which I can see, but then again, not really, because I'm still stuck on the fact that I think that the characters just they weren't good. They were not well-developed characters. And I think that they were not fun to read about. Miss Jackson characters are normal people with the same kinds of hopes and dreams and hang-ups that all of us have, and that makes them very relatable and very lovable. So I think that what's interesting about this review, personally, as I continue to read it and it makes me interested in it, is that I really believe that this review was looking at this book from the perspective of more so like the character development and the community aspect, which technically, even when I put my own review, was that I loved the emphasis on the small Black businesses. I love the emphasis on the diversity and the emphasis on community. But what I find interesting about this particular review is that there's no commentary on the romance and the relationship between our two main characters, which was in essence for me the problem of this entire book. This is supposed to be a romance book, and while there are other factors that contribute to it, we're looking at a romance developed between two characters, and we don't see that. There is a lackluster romance. It was very familial like. It didn't work. It just never, nothing about it worked. So to have a romance book where the romance didn't work, all of these other factors, which it's funny, like reading this 5-star review, is that I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of the things that are being said in this, if I was only looking at this romance review for the other aspects of it that worked, because everything that's being said in this review did work in this book. The community, the emphasis on entrepreneurship, the emphasis on making sure that we're not stereotyping groups and that we're not creating caricatures of groups. That's true, but we're looking at a romance book, and because the romance didn't work, the book for me as a whole there was no purpose to it. There was no plot. There was nothing about it. There were side elements that were a good framework, but the meat of the novel just was not there at all. Okay, and the end of this says, it doesn't take long to get invested in their happily ever afters and to get hooked on this author's deft way of navigating their lives. You'll be reading for them from start to finish and looking for the next book in the series the second you hit the last page. So clearly I wasn't invested. Clearly I don't care if there's a second book. I'm just not going to read it because I just didn't like this book at all. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so this video is actually going a little bit longer because I'm talking so much. So I'm actually only gonna do one review for the rest of the books as well. So the next one that we have on this list is gonna be Catherine House. Catherine House is a very polarizing book. You either hate it or you love it. I have seen very few reviews that come in between. People usually are like, I love the quirkiness of it. I love that there is this ambiguous ending. Or people are like me and they're like, what in the world? Why did I waste my time reading this book? It was not good. And the reviews on this show, like this book has a low star rating to begin with. It sits at about a 3.1 on Goodreads, which is not a bad rating. I don't want to continue to get into this void of where like 3 stars means that it's a poorly rated book, because that's not true. 3 stars for me is a solid read, but I think that this definitely shows how polarizing the reviews are on this book. I gave it a 1 star because I just completely disliked it, but we're gonna look at someone who loved it. This book really wowed me and is a new favorite. This is my absolutely perfect dark academia campus novel for fall. So I think that seems to be kind of like the general consensus, is that if you like dark academia that takes place on a campus and you like that gothic feel, then this is the book that you probably would enjoy. I adore the characters in this novel. They were so real and imperfect. Listen, Inez to me was just not real. Inez had problems. I understand that we all have problems, but I mean, I just didn't like her, and I'm all for realistic depictions of human life, which is why I'm such a huge fan, A, of hard-hitting books, and B, realistic fiction. However, Inez just was not it for me. Like, was not it. She was imperfect, which I respect, but I mean, so all over the place that it just boggled my mind and I just could not even relate to it whatsoever. And not everything that I read is going to be a situation where I relate to it, so that's a bad word choice, but I just could not invest in her as a character whatsoever. The setting was very atmospheric. The setting, see, this is where I think I conflict with people, because people are like, oh yeah, the setting was very atmospheric, and I'm like, so are we calling being inebriated and just like drunken high atmospheric? Because I literally felt like I was stoned the entire time that I read this book. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel as high as a kite and drunk off of my backside reading this book. I just felt like all of my senses were just completely numbed. And I think this, what's so interesting is that people seem to feel like, oh yeah, this is atmosphere, and I'm like, no, I just felt high and drunk. Like, there was no atmosphere for me. I feel like I graduated from Catherine House. Wow. This book was very slow, but in the best possible way. It was slow. It was so slow. Okay, so I'm not gonna read this last line because this last line technically is a spoiler, and if you haven't read this book, I don't want to spoil it for you because this is a huge component of the reveal at the end of the book, which to me makes absolutely no sense. So this person said that they liked that aspect and they liked the review, and I'm like still here questioning, like, do we all really know what that thing is? Like, do we know? Do we really understand what that is? Because it was some serious elements that I feel like unless you specialize in that area, you couldn't possibly know what it was. So I had no idea. I'm glad that they understood it, but I didn't get it at all. Like, at all. This is my first dark academia novel, and the others, if the others are anything like this, I think I found a new favorite genre. Perfect, absolutely perfect. I wouldn't change a thing about this novel. I would change everything about this novel. I would. If I could, I would change. And it's crazy because I think the first part of it is intriguing. But I think that the deeper into the novel that you get as a reader, the crazier things get, and the more, I guess, senses, like my senses just felt so completely detached from it that I just didn't get what the heck was going on at all. But brava for this individual for enjoying it, because whoop. Wasn't for me, boo. Alright, so next we have on this list Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe by Melissa De La Cruz, which I don't know who told her that this was even a book to write. What editor, why somebody even thought that this was the way to go. This was not the way to go. And if we thought that ratings on Catherine House were low, because Catherine House still has a rating which defines it, in my opinion, as a solid book. Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe has a 2.6 rating on Goodreads, so most of us in the reading world did not feel like it was something that needed to be released. So once again, we're coming across kind of sparse, like, enjoyment of this book. And I absolutely loathed, I loathe Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe. But there are some people who enjoyed it. So we are going to find a 5-star review. Okay, so I found one where I'm not going to read the beginning of it because in the beginning of it, it's basically giving a synopsis of the book. So they go on to say, I continue to enjoy Melissa De La Cruz's writing style in this novel. So I read, I think, maybe short things, like if Melissa De La Cruz has been a part of like a short story collection, I think I have read her other stuff, and I find her writing to be okay. It's nothing that's mind-blowing, but I think that she is a decent writer. This was my first time reading one of her fiction novels, and I absolutely loved it. It definitely fits with the Hallmark movies I always watch, and I'm so excited to watch the movie now that I've read the book. Okay, so A, Pride and Prejudice is absolutely nothing like this dumpster fire of a book. Okay, like nothing. I am a big fan of Pride and Prejudice. I rather enjoy Miss Jane Austen, and this, honey, is not it, okay? This book does not do her any justice. It does no movie adaptation any justice. I think that reading this book and going to watch either adaptation from the miniseries or the 2005 version with Keira Knightley, like, it's looking at night and day. They're not the same thing. I think that the pride aspects of Pride and Prejudice, actually just the Pride and Prejudice as a whole, those two words, being prideful and being prejudiced, was so elevated in this book that it was just distasteful to a point that it made it difficult for me personally to consume. So I hope that they had I hope that they had a good time watching this movie or watching a movie, I'm hoping that they enjoyed it. Or maybe there was a Hallmark adaptation. Maybe that's what they're talking about. I don't know. Maybe there was a Hallmark adaptation that they ended up watching. Well, either way, I hope that they enjoyed it. The story was cute and a fun and quick read. I read it all in one day, which is an excellent way to kick off the new year. Wow, I definitely do agree that it was a quick read. It did not take me long to read this book. Would I have started my new year reading this book? Absolutely not. So I'm glad that this was a way for them to start the new year, but this was a horrible way to end my year when I read this book, when I read it a few years ago. I fell in love with the characters. Having Darcy as the main character was amazing because we got to see an independent woman take charge of her life and prove that women can make it on their own. I love the interactions between Darcy and her best friend Bingley and her family as well. The chemistry between Darcy and Luke was so much fun to read, and their relationship has a more complicated story, which I loved. I do feel like it was a tad bit more complex than what we see, but I think what we see in like the original text, but I do think that's because we're looking at a modern retelling of a classic tale in which Austen was writing within, you know, certain parameters. However, I did not like any of the characters in this book. I feel like there was so much emphasis on money and flashiness and wealth and bouginess that it just to me was not true to the original text. And I know that it wouldn't be word for word true to the original text, but for me there is this whole sense of wealth and having money, and money being the center of things, and who you could and could not marry, and marrying because your family needed money. Like that very much so is a huge part contextually of the historical background in which Jane Austen is writing. However, I think that Melissa Dela Cruz took it just a step too far, to the point that it became so outlandish that even in the 21st century it was like this just wouldn't even work in our century and time, and it just wasn't enjoyable to read, and I didn't find it to be romantic or attractive to see that gaudiness. That's the word I was like. Overall, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is the perfect Christmas read. It was actually like reading a Hallmark movie, which I loved. I really enjoyed it. I hope you pick this up, and if you don't want to read the book, go and support the movie. So I'm guessing that from the end of this review that there actually is a Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe movie. Yes, there is. See, I could have just googled that. Okay, so there's a Pride and Prejudice Mistletoe movie, which I did not know that it was made into an adaptation. Will I ever watch it? Absolutely not, but I'm glad to see that they enjoyed the book and enjoyed the movie, but they just were not for me. Okay, and the last book that we have on this list is Blood and Snow by Rachelle Workman. This is a book that I had picked up because I was looking to read a little bit more like YA fantasy from the indie side of publishing, because I typically, prior to this year, I've been reading a lot more indie stuff, but prior to this year I have been reading a lot of traditionally published stuff, and I wanted to give it a try. And this book for me was kind of just one that was really all over the place. It was supposed to be like a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs retelling, but then it had like some vampire parts mixed in, and it was just so much. It was just all over the place. There was just really no guidelines. There was no framework, no structure, no nothing. It just seems like it was trying to combine a bunch of different elements into one story. I felt like there was a little bit of cultural appropriation going on with the inclusion of some Japanese traditions, because I felt like it had nothing to do with the story whatsoever, and it was introduced as an element just to introduce it, and I just didn't like it. But there are some people who really enjoyed it, so we're gonna read a 5-star review. So I've had this book in my Kindle list for a while. Finally decided that it was its turn to be read, and wow, I read the first page and was like, well, this is okay. I did too. I read the first page and I was like, this is probably going to be good. Like, I haven't read anything like this. It's going to be interesting. Then I continued to read, and okay went to good, and then great, and then awesome. No, for me, it was the complete opposite. It went from, this is okay, I don't know if I'm going to like this, oh my God, I don't like this. Who said that this was okay to write? It really is a good book with twists and turns of love, betrayal, and fantasy. Okay, I wouldn't even say the love part, because that was all over the place too. Betrayal, yes. Fantasy, yeah. Needless to say, a day later I finished the book and it stuck in my head, and when books are stuck in your head, you know they're great pieces of work. Great story, definitely recommend it. It stuck in my head, but I wouldn't really say for me personally that it was a great piece of literature. I think I do want to explore more of the indie fantasy genre, but this was not the place for me to start. This definitely was not. I think if this had stuck to one specific storyline, it would have done a lot better than what I got. All right, y'all, so that is it. That is my video of me reading 5-star reviews of books that I didn't like. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. If you've made it this far, let me know a book that you dislike that everyone seems to love, because that does happen every now and then. If you're looking for ways to support my channel, the links will be down in the description box below. If you are looking for ways to find me on social media, they will also be down in the description box below, and I will be back with another video soon. Bye.